A very good evening, everyone. Off to a great start with a handful of us, hoping that it grows as the evening wears along. Our writer in focus today is Judy Fong Bates, all the way from Ontario, Canada. We were greatly looking forward, still am, hoping for a miracle. Just got a call about 3 minutes ago to say the temperature at her farm in Ontario is minus 25 degrees, snowed under, and the hydro is off, which means the power is off. And she managed to get through to me on the landline. They are trying to get Hydro Canada to come and fix the problem if they can, unless the cable is well under snow. But we'll just start as we always do. So Judy is actually no stranger to Kolkata, and some of our Bengal Club members who are here, Ranjana Mukherjee all the way from the US, Anu Suya, Sangeeta Kichlu, all of you will appreciate the fact that we have with us today Ranjana Mukherjee, who's also a club member, and I'm always thrilled, I think we all are, to see Bengal Club members across the ponds and puddles coming to attend our book discussions. So Judy Fong Bates is, as I said, no stranger to Kolkata. Gurudash, let's have our PowerPoint and run through the images and get a feel for what we are facing today. So here is Judy, and Judy has 3 books to her credit. One was The China Dog, written in 1997. The next one was Midnight at the Dragon Cafe, which is my personal favorite. And I think The Year of Finding Memory, which is a memoir, moves away from the fictional portfolio, which she began her writing career with, quite late in the day, actually. Gurudash, next one, please. Gurudash, the next one, please.
Can you see my screen, ma'am?
Not yet. We can't see the second slide. Second slide, please. Thanks.
Are you able to see it now?
Yeah, not the second slide yet, but we can see. Yes. Will you try again?
Yeah.
So Judy's been a guest speaker at Jadavpur University's Department of Comparative Literature, Center for Canadian Studies, and she is a great hit with both the postgraduate students and the undergraduate students, whether it's at the University of Toronto, where she's visited my class many times. And I think the reason perhaps is she's a very direct kind of writer, you know. There are no shoo-shas and hoo-has about her. She has been on the Governor General's list, won many awards, well known in Canada for her dealings with the ideas of the diaspora, and she walks that in-between space where I think she celebrates her hybridity, and she doesn't really have the whinges that many of us have, including myself, about being a minority in Canada. She celebrates her identity and says that she straddles both the Anglo-Canadian world and the world of multicultural Canada. So I think what to look at for this evening would be the explications by our readers on this idea of Judy Fong Bates finding that liminal space where she feels she's been able to actively contribute to as an artistic producer, as somebody who is had a vexed history with her community in Canada. As many of you might be aware, Canada does have a blotched history of immigration, as do most North America, most of North America and Europe. So the Chinese head tax is the core of why Judy decided to write a story that would be true enough, a memoir that would take her back as she's traversed the footsteps of her father when he went back from Canada to China. Next, please, Gurdash. So I can never do without this reminiscing by Salman Rushdie, who maintains that the retrieval of identity by memory recall is a kind of inventing of tradition. And as he writes in Imaginary Homelands, expatriates are haunted by a sense of loss, some urgent need to reclaim, look back. But he reminds us, if we do look back, we must do so in the knowledge which gives rise to profound uncertainties that our physical alienation almost inevitably means that we will not be able to reclaim precisely or exactly the thing that was lost, but that we will, in short, create fictions, maybe not actual villages or cities, but invisible ones, imaginary homelands, ideas of the mind. So all the fiction that Judy's written, a book of short stories, and her first novel, Midnight at the Dragon Cafe, very much reflective of the life that she led as the only Chinese girl with the only Chinese mother and the only Chinese father in Acton, Ontario, which is one of the provinces that we will keep coming back to in Canada. Next, please. So very quickly, as I was saying, that the loss of language, loss of culture, the violence on the mother tongue, forgetting the mother tongue and the fatherland in the beginning, and then the need to retrieve all this later in order to ligature your minority self to a sense of belonging, you know, the hyphenated Canadian. We've talked about this when we've discussed Obasan by Joy Kogawa. We've discussed this when we talked at length on Michael Ondaatje's Running in the Family. But I think this is possibly another novel, Midnight at the Dragon Cafe, and then the memoir that is up for discussion today, The Year of Finding Memory, where the vexed history of Canada becomes the central issue that we are trying to unveil. So next one, please, Gurudash. So the nostalgia for Utopia, the Asian Canadian writers we have explored are trying to retrieve their own histories. And in doing so, for instance, in retrieving the history of her father, who came to Canada to find better opportunities, to find more funds to send back to China and the poorer relatives. And then after that, as the Cultural Revolution struck, is all about recreating, remembering the stories. And Judy Fong Bates reconstructs the kind of history of a lost homeland. So in the act of reconstructing a family history, what we find is that she actually conjures up a history of her former homeland, the Chinese nation. And she pieces the bits together in the narratives that she hears in the accounts by her many relatives that she meets all the way in the 4 counties and all through the places where she visits her father's families, the ancestral homes. Yes, Gurudash. So once again, Judy is a very favorite author who is explored in the Center for Canadian Studies, and Debushi Dottorai and Shucharita Chattopadhyay have done a lot to enable students in the conflict department. And here you have Nilanjana Deb, who's also a professor at the English department. I wanted to bring this to your notice because not many cities in India have a Center for Canadian Studies in their universities. So I think we can be very proud that we have people such as Judy Fong visiting us. And this was, I think, 2016, she was a guest at our home. She was also a guest at the Bengal Club, and this is at Jadavpur University. Next, please, Gurudash. This was when I first met Judy way back in 2006. And as you can see, it was a very multicultural class with an endowment by the Vice Chancellor, the Chancellor of the University of Toronto, Vivian Poy, who was also a senator, and she wanted to promote this idea of Asian cultures in Canada and helped second generation, third generation students explore their own histories by meeting writers such as Judy Fong. What does she say about her identity, though? That's worth looking at. She says, I'm more Canadian than Chinese. I feel Canadian. My memories are informed by my family's stories, but my identity is Canadian. I love Chinese food and Chinese culture, but I am a Canadian. So I was hoping very much if we do get a hold of her today that we can, run these questions by her. And she has some fascinating things to say about how she feels it took her a long time to become a writer because she thought, I'm Chinese. Who in Canada, the majority of Canadians being Anglo-Canadian, who would be interested in stories about my community? So there was a sense of not really being secure enough, but she persisted. And there were people who told her that no, she had a story to tell and they wanted to hear it. So I think at the ripe old age or young age of in her 40s, she wrote in 1997, China Dog, which was a collection of short stories, and then Midnight at the Dragon Cafe. Her father, in fact, as you know, for those of us who've managed to read The Year of Finding Memory, know that her father was, as were many Chinese and Korean immigrants to Canada in the first generation, he was a laundryman. And it wasn't exactly the best profession to be in, but he persisted and wanted his own children to have a better life and a better opportunity at education. And I think Judy has made right on that promise. Yes, please, next one. So what qualifies as a memoir? The main defining characteristics are it's nonfiction, autobiographical. The word comes from the French mémoire, meaning memory. So in the simplest sense, memoirs are just that. They're about the author remembering, reminiscing, reflecting, reconstructing experiences from their lives. And I think it's important to remember that stories such as memory recalls are unstable because of the very nature of their asking who is writing the history and whose history is it? So if the lion were to tell the story of a hunt, it would be a very different account. The diasporics talk about their condition differently from those in their host country. Personal history often conflicts with the history of the nation, as we know in this case, the history of China, and also the history of Canada, which had awful Chinese head tax. I'll tell you about that in a minute. So body of the nation being intersecting with the corporeal body of the writer is important to remember. Next, please, Gurdash. So the Chinese head tax and the ignominy of being Chinese in Canada, what was it about? It was $500 a head tax, introduced in 1885 as a means of controlling Chinese immigration. Through the early 1880s, 15,000 laborers were brought from China to build the Canadian Pacific Railway. And these Chinese people had it very, very hard to bring any members of the family, because for each person that they brought in, it would cost them $500. Impossibility. They hardly earned $500 a year. So to bring a family member, please would you unmute yourself if you're having an issue, it's interfering with us listening. Yes, indeed, she did keep that receipt, and here you see this, the Dominion of Canada. It was a piece of document of shame, as we know.
Can't hear you, Julie.
It looks like her connection might be bad at the other end.
Yeah.
We'll have to wait for a while.
So,
Julie, we lost you
hi,
for a bit.
hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I think I've had a little glitch with the computer. So I want you to read this because this is going to be the core of our explication. This is from the Year of Finding Memory. So she says, I wanted my father to grow low-fun vegetables. Low-fun vegetables are the vegetables that are eaten by the Anglo-Canadians. Things like carrots, radishes, tomatoes, etc. And she says, my parents, their last crop of bok choy, preserved the bok choy in a smelly brown, salty brine, and then hung the drooping vegetables on the backyard clothesline to dry, allowed all the neighbors to see the limp, wrinkled greens. The few adolescent boys in our neighborhood would run through our backyard and knock the stringy bok choy, cursing. The scrawny, when my father ran after them, cursing, scrawny boys would turn around and laugh, taunting him with cries of chinky, chinky Chinaman. But in the winter, when my mother made soup with pork bones, red dates, carrots, and dried bok choy, I knew that low fun food could never be this good. So I think all the issues about minority, retrieval of culture, being in that in-between space where you want to be mainstream Anglo-Canadian, but you have great things to celebrate about your own tradition and your own heritage, all that in this one paragraph, and food is always a marker of culture. So without further ado, what we'll do is we'll open it up to our Bengal Club members first, and then we have our own set of people, guests and scholars who are joining in today. So we already have 20 participants. I would like to call on Choitali Moitro. Dr. Choitali Moitro, are you here? Choitali, are you here?
No, ma'am,
Okay.
she's not there.
Gurudash, is she here?
No, ma'am, she's not there.
She's not. Okay, no problem. Let's start with Dr. Jean Ewart. Jean Carroll Ewart, are you here? All the way from Florida. Okay, then we'll move on to Mrs. Anju Munshi. Go ahead, Anju.
Hi, good evening, everybody. This was a book from the heart, for the heart. And Judy's parents, they escaped the Cultural Revolution, as we all know who've read the book, and to get into some very tough times. And it left a very deep impact on Judy herself, because if you remember, there's a reference of a broken table in the beginning of the book, you know. I somehow find it's a metaphor which applies to uh, all that happens in the book. You know, there's a broken relationship, there's a broken sibling connect, there's a broken culture, there is, you know, a split kind of culture which she's divided between. So all through the metaphor of two halves of a table, I think it runs through. And there are fragments which she's trying to pick up and piece together and make it into a kind of a composite whole, a kind of a memory which she's finding in different scattered pieces, and she's trying to combine it all together, and she's trying to see it as a composite whole. The thing which struck me the most was the mother-daughter relationship. I was thinking about it for a very long time, and I was wondering, you know, because this is one relationship which actually gets a girl ready for her interpersonal relationships in life, you know, because the mother-daughter relationship is supposed to be a very important and an intrinsic part of a girl's growing up, because it gets her ready with her uh, her connect with the world, with her interpersonal relationship, and also when it comes to raising a family. So there is a very strong admiration for the father on one side, and there is a very strong longing and yearning for her mother to be the way she wanted her mother to be. There is a missing mother in her life, I thought so. And there is a father who, despite the kind of work he's doing, despite the kind of whatever it is, his hardships and his going through rough times, and not being a very wealthy man, but he's got a richness of character which she portrays beautifully. She talks about him as uh, you know, uh, as a very honest man, as a man who remained, who is a Confucian fan. I remained a dutiful Confucian daughter. His age-old ideals had been very much a part of the air in my father's laundry. And what was the philosophy of Confucius? It was honesty and modesty, vis-a-vis aggression and an urge to challenge authority. So her father, despite all the odds and despite all the hardships and, you know, cultural conflict, he did manage to live a simple and an honest life. And throughout, I think she manages to appreciate that. And it also comes as a very stark contrast to the mother who spoke. I don't know whether I would call it a lie, but then she did say that a no good man. She used to call her father a no good man. And she did not talk about her earlier marriage to her. She proposed marriage to him. But when she did that, it was basically for convenience and for survival. And later on, she told him. So I think putting it all together, I realized that this is the kind of brokenness that she's trying to cement. She's trying to get to understand the cracks in the relationships of her father, between her father and mother, and how she's trying to fill up the cracks and the voids beautifully. Um, I think I don't want to take much time. This is my take on the book. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we
I
can.
can't hear.
Loud
Okay.
and clear. Loud
We
and
can
Yes,
hear
clear.
you.
Anju, we
Yes.
can hear you.
Okay. So I have finished. And thank you.
So, Anju, I think as usual, you hit it, straight on the nail. The brokenness you talk about, I think what endeared me to the book was that she talks about the bitterness that there was between the parents. And, from dysfunctional families, we all know that children are terribly driven in the latter part of their lives to go back and find out what was it that went wrong with their parents' relationship. And I think that's what drove her to write The Year of Finding Memory. And the fact that she found her father had committed suicide. Yeah. And that's how her mother and she discovered his Dominion papers and these documents, which, as she says in her interviews, are really pretty, but they are worthless because they are not worth anything of value. Neither do they give the immigrant Chinese a status which is equal to the Anglo-Canadian majority in Canada. So once again, I think in a very nuanced way, Anju, you brought out that this brokenness is what drove the project of her going back to her father's ancestral home, right? And finding out what went wrong. Thank you for that, Anju. Perhaps we should move on to Dr. Paramita Mukherjee Malik, a poet and a scientist and a great positivist. Paramita, are you around?
Very much here. Thank you, Julie, for the kind words. The best part of what touched my heart the most in this book was the importance of family. Like and they were very poor. Both her parents were very poor. And when the father says, you must be frugal with yourself so you can be generous with family and friends. I think that touched my heart the most. They were in such a sad situation there in Canada, but still they used to send money across to China, to their family and family. So it was that which touched my heart the most. And I feel Judy, the author has really, been very, very honest. Judy has been very honest. Like there's a part where she goes to her little aunt's house and she sees all photographs, and she remembered her mother taking photographs before a lovely stone house, and she used to send these photographs back to China to give a picture that they're very happy, they're very content in Canada. So, for a daughter to write so, I felt she has totally, she has no ego clashes. No, she is a very satisfied, very secure person who has written about her childhood. These little tiny things shows that she's a very honest and secure person, secure author. And this also, and like Anjuji said, I just loved the metaphor of the broken table. And she goes on repeating that, I wish when her mother was alive, she always wished that she could bring these two tables together. So these three things were very much like to my heart, and I really loved these three things. And the book as a whole is a very good read and very enjoyable.
Thank you, Paramita. Short and sweet. And I think you've arrested the most important points in your explication, as usual. And always the idea that though they were poor, there was always the philanthropic instinct to send back money, even though they could hardly afford to keep their bodies and souls together. I think Judy Fong Bates does pay tribute to her father because of that. But, you know, Judy also is, I think, I don't know, at minus 25 degrees and with the power outage that Judy's having this morning there, which she called me about, whether we will be able to accost her and ask her. But she says the bitterness that there was between her parents, largely, Paramita, came from the fact that her mother was a very sharp-tongued woman. And I think it would be nice to ask her, what is it with her relationship with her mother? Because there are parts in the book which are actually bordering on a kind of humor, which she brings to the fore to deal with the aged parent. Yes, Paramita.
If you give me a minute more, I feel the bitterness in her mother was basically because when her mother was teaching in her village back in China, you know, she had a kind of respect which she didn't get when she was in Canada. She was like always feeling empty out there. I think that was a cause of bitterness too. I feel that.
Yes, I think that makes a lot of sense, actually. The geographical space, the community, all that would have a bearing on how her mother would react on a daily basis. Thanks, Paramita. Sangeeta Kishlu, looking forward to your explication. Go ahead.
Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Yeah, so as I said, the book began on a kind of a little suppressed note, and I found it lacking in angst and depth. And the writing was like a little disappointing. The beginning was very powerful because it started with her father's suicide. But as the book built up, again, it was all about her father. So, you know, the mother occupied a large portion of the book, but in the end, the book summed up about, you know, it was all about her dad and the reason for the story. As Paramita said, this, the bitterness between her parents was also the reason for her to put down, you know, this book, because it left her a very kind of empty person. And I totally agree with Paramita that her mother was an educated person who was respected for her education. And she came to Canada and, you know, her husband chose to be a laundry man. And I don't think she could ever reconcile to the fact that this was going to be her life. But the only thing I didn't understand, if she was educated, why couldn't she go and learn English? You know, this is something that is a big question mark. If she was educationally inclined, academically inclined, I think to some extent she should take responsibility. And she was also not very old when she went to Canada. She could have taken a grip of herself and got herself educated. So I feel that was the major cause for bitterness. And keep in mind that her father had two sharp-tongued women. Even the first wife was supposed to be very sharp-tongued. So obviously he was a very, you know, self-punishing kind of soul, perhaps. And his wives couldn't tolerate that. I'm just guessing. He was a good man, felt very responsible for his children, but a bit self-punishing. And that actually created a lot of sorrow in his children, you know. The thing that comes out in this book also is about Judy and her dancing between two identities, as you said here. I mean, I saw that flashing here. In this whole book, she is, in the beginning, very clearly, she wanted to be Lo Fong, you know, and the vegetable story said that. And although at heart, she knew the bok choy was more tasty, she really wanted to discard that and eat carrots and tomatoes. So she very clearly wanted to be a Canadian, and she's declared that when she visited Jadavpur. But after visiting China, see, at the end of it, people always want to hold on to their roots. And I think that is what she declares in the end, that she wants to piece together her roots with her current low Fong status. So yeah, so this is these are the two things. One is the parents' relationship. One is Judy's identity crisis, so to speak. And this is something I think a lot of immigrants go through, you know. And of course, as far as her father was concerned, I think he was very focused and completely exhausted by the age of 80. And he was quite clear that he was giving his today for his children's tomorrow. And he died in grief because of that. Yeah, that's all I have to say, Judy. Oh, can't hear you. Julie, can't hear you.
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So I think the point that Ranjana brought up was quite right, you know, and it is a fact, and that the qualifications were in a way fudged. And I think, if I remember correctly, in several conversations with Judy, what comes through is, until she was 16 or even more, and she was given a copy of James Baldwin's book, and that's the first time she realized, hey, this is a Black man, and he's saying that people are reading him. He's saying that he is a matter of interest for Anglo American readers. So reading James Baldwin made her realize, so what if I'm Chinese? The Anglo-Canadian community will read me, even if I'm Chinese. In spite of being Chinese, despite being Chinese, my culture and my way of life would in some ways interest them. So I think it took her a heck of a long time, actually. She was 47 years old when she published her first book of short stories. And it wasn't an easy task, because I think she was a school teacher. She's a meticulous writer. She's very, very particular about grammar. And she's mentored many young writers in Canada. But the fact remains that in her moments of lucidity, honesty, Judy's very shoot from the hip. What you see is what you get. So I think all the points that have been brought out gesture towards this very down-to-earth person, suffered the twinges of hunger, the twinges of not quite being part of the majority community, and yet, I think without too much fuss, she wrote about her experiences without putting too much polish on them, and told her stories. And that's probably why she is considered, in the Canadian context, very comparable with Joy Kogawa. As you know, the Japanese internment was a big blotch in North American history during the war, where the Japanese were treated as second-class citizens. They were put into internment camps. In the case of the Chinese community, I think what Judy Fong Bates does, like Joy Kogawa with the Japanese, is to show us how the Chinese head tax, which affected her father to the point of making him commit suicide, because he wrote that he felt he was always a second-class citizen. So the multicultural part of it is just bashed. She never once makes a political statement. And I think this is what Anju and Sangeeta and all of us felt, despite the fact that there is no rebellion as a post-colonial writer. And Roma Bhattacharya would, I think, agree with me here. The fact that she has made the point of telling the world, showing and telling the world that Canada is not all that without blame or blemish, I think speaks a lot for what she's managed to achieve. All right, Anusuya, would love to hear your views. Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. And thank you for all the insights. And yes, Sangeeta, I couldn't agree more that a person with her background and education and having been a teacher, I think as a person in a new environment, the first thing you would want to do is learn the language of the new space to integrate yourself. And she didn't do so, and instead chose to blame her husband, whom she kept terming a very small man. So, I mean, you could see the direct translation that the author has made, you know, the first husband who was no good man, and the second husband who was small man. And obviously her father, having been a doctor, was a big man in their lives. So, you know, these sort of terminologies are also, you know, the Asian way of describing, which we also find common in the way we describe in Indian languages. So that was one similarity that was going on, becoming visible when she was translating the way they describe from Chinese to English. Apart from that, yes, I saw and I felt her pain, because see, she was a very, there were two generations between her parents and her. They were very old parents. So there was bound to be a gap. Plus, they came together, her father and mother came together only out of necessity. And the way the mother kept saying, no money, no life. And that was her mantra. And having made money such a big central feature of their lives, and the lack of it and the need to send it, I found it so strange that she could not recollect or put in the book even one event of laughter and frivolity at the table. And I was left questioning what could have gone so badly wrong in that last dinner that made the father go and commit suicide just after the daughter left. Did they have an argument which is being not talked about? Something provoked it. Otherwise, why did he wait till he was 80, like we were discussing, to commit suicide? I mean, he had a miserable life. He could have escaped from it earlier. But he obviously felt something was done and dusted, and he finished his work and he wanted to go. So these questions are kind of unanswered, but I'm happy that she eventually did go to China, and the way she saw her father from a different perspective and healed a wound inside herself regarding the misconception she had of her father, and saw him as the human being much respected that he was in his homeland, and saw it through that eye. I thought that was a good closure for her, and was probably something that she needed really to do. And yet I felt that she could have need not have waited till she was 60 years old to have gone and closed all those stories inside her head, because you know, there was enough time for her to have supported her parents in buying them a ticket and taking them to China. And they needed it more than she needed it. You know, they gave so much up for their family. And I also felt that, you know, she talks in passing of all the various family members who emerge from the woodwork every time she goes to China. But there could be a little more appreciation of the way they encompassed her, a total stranger, and made her feel so wanted. So all of these, yes, the book impacted me a lot. I understood it from a very objective view. And but I feel like it was not too enjoyable a read for me, frankly speaking.
Yes, Anusuya, I think you made a lot of very pertinent points about the lacunas in the book. And I too felt that there was more questions than answers. And I particularly was very taken aback by this point about why, you know, why would he commit suicide at that point? Also, I don't know whether you noticed it, Anusuya, but since we are talking about the lacunas, when she speaks about meeting her half-sister, she speaks about how the half-sister always wanted to establish that the half-sister knew the father more.
Yeah.
And there was that tug of war that was
Yes.
almost imminent there between them.
Yes.
And I found that quite fascinating, that it's a family saga as well, you know?
It is a family saga, and those dynamics between siblings which were uncomfortable were being pushed under the carpet very consciously,
Yes.
because she didn't have time to dwell on all of that.
Yes.
But again, the time when another half sister mentioned that her mother chased her father, you know, that there was a slight competition which was being established by the half sisters and brothers on either side.
Yes.
And I suppose it's a given, and it will be there, given the fact that each was married earlier and they had so many children. So, and it's not like it was the most accepted marriage. It was a marriage that came about through necessity and survival. And again, yes, I mean, the horrors of what China went through with communism coming in, I mean, it's documented well. And I thought she juxtaposed the two countries, states, and the way their history got linked inadvertently very well, you know.
Absolutely, Anusuya. And that's why I think it's very important as readers for us to sort of get a gist of the idea of the intersectionality of personal history with the history of the nation.
The history of the nation.
Yeah,
Yes.
which you brought out really well, and Sangeeta as well, and Anshu, that what is happening in the microcosm of her family is happening in the macrocosm of China.
Yes.
And even in Canada, where her father is treated as a second class or even a third class citizen, really, giving his blood, sweat, tears, his life. And there were hundreds and thousands of such generous largesse from these, struggling masses who came from across the oceans. And I think the year of finding memory is testimony to that. And I find this fascinating how you've talked about the lacunas. And I wish we had a way in which we could ask
Professor, the author's on the call.
If she's here. Sorry?
The author's on the call, I think.
Yes.
I can't hear you.
Judy is on the call now. Judy has
lovely.
joined us.
Thank you for telling me. Yeah, I've had to move from my computer, which suddenly, did a ditzy on me. So, Judy, are you there? Hi. Hello, Judy.
I don't think she's there, Judy.
Oh,
Not yet, huh?
Hello?
Okay.
No.
Thanks,
Oh, she's
Vibha.
here. She's
Thanks,
here.
Annie.
Oh, she's
She's
there.
here. She's here.
She's
I am here.
Okay. We can't see her or hear her yet. Judy, would you unmute yourself, please?
I'm here.
Hi, Judy. Okay, let's a very warm welcome, Judy.
I am unmuted. It looks like.
Oh, lovely to hear you, Judy. Did you catch some of the conversation that we were having about your book? Okay, so we've got a few more people to go. We'll. Is that all right by you if we just finish up the contributions and then we have our conversation with you? Hi, Judy.
Yes, finish. Hello.
Thank you. Have you got your hydro back? Have you got the power back? Fabulous. Vivek, if you're there, would love to hear your views.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yes, the hydro's back. That's why I'm online.
Yeah, great.
Yes, Vivek, go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, and very happy New Year to everybody who's online. And of course, a big welcome to Judy Fong Bates for joining us. I'll just go too quickly what I thought of it as what I felt of it as I read the book. The memoir of a daughter's emotional journey and her painful acceptance of conflicting truths. She confronts herself and her own prejudices, at last coming to terms with the understanding that the years growing up with her unhappy parents were in fact a gift from people who had suffered greatly themselves. In telling the story of her parents, Judy Bates tells the story of how she came to know them, of finding memory. Opening with the shocking suicide of her 80-year-old father, a laundryman, she explores the world of family secrets, loss, love, courage, shame, and her stories of visiting the graves of her parents in Canada and of their relatives in China, carrying out age-old customs to ease the passage of the departed soul, is evocative of so many past traditions that we have in our own societies. As a good Chinese daughter, and I quote, "I have performed these rituals every year since my father's death, but I have never left with a sense of peace, unable to escape the fact that the unhappiness permeated my parents' marriage." In the end, Judy doesn't unravel the mystery of her parents' unhappy marriage, and I was left wondering at the circumstances of her father's late in life suicide, her mother's almost incandescent fury, and even Michael, her Canadian husband, remains a shadowy figure. Judy admits that she herself remembers almost nothing of China, which she had left as a young child. So that's not surprising, although memories from a young age do stay with you, and I know that for myself as well, stay with you almost throughout your life. My childhood memories of China have a womb-like quality to them, free-floating and seen through a watery lens. A wonderful use of words there. The book is full of phrases such as, "I imagined," "I pictured," "I can only guess," "I will never know," as well as lingering questions as to where exactly was the place where she was born. The sad truth of the matter was that their eventual marriage had nothing to do with love and everything to do with survival. Unhappiness permeated her parents' lives in Canada, a land that after decades still remained foreign to them. It's a complex feeling of rage and grief and a desire to bring together two stranded parts of her parents' lives, which is echoed throughout. Indeed, it is the two sides of the table cut in half that her mother mentions, prompt Judy to make the two trips in 2006 and 2007 to China and to the ancestral land of her parents. The author's interest and focus is on her personal family history. She yearns to see a China that belonged to her parents' time, symbolized by the traditional rooftops of the ornamental dragons and the watchtowers that have stood witness through the centuries that she describes and documents through her photographs. Throughout the book, there are many references to Chinese food and the part it played in her mother's memories, and this is what really rang true as I was reading it. And referring to the practice of growing plants from seeds provided the traveling Chinese grocer. Some years later, I learned that they were paper whites, narcissus, and that sui sin fa meant clear water flower. I've continued this tradition in my own home, and I know and myself wondering if I do so not just because of the beauty of these delicate flowers, but also because of my memory of a rare moment of shared delight between two very unhappy people. As I look back, I cannot help but wonder if these dainty white flowers were purchased by them, not just because they were a harbinger of spring, of warm days to come, but because they were a reminder of home of China. The travel back to China becomes a process for the author to work through feelings of resentment and lack of comprehension of her parents, to realize that at last a richer sort of knowing, an understanding of her parents' storied past, their burdens, hardships, secrets and shame, isolation, disappointments, the deeply embedded racism and prejudice they suffered in Canada. But the memories of growing up Chinese in Canada, a nearly forgotten part of history, have indeed been found. As she watches her husband Michael tending his garden and remembers her father recreating China in his garden full of Chinese vegetables, Judy contemplates the concepts of home and garden, finding seeds of affinity with her parents and with China. We had our seeds, even though we'd come all the way to China to find them. Thank you.
As
Can't hear you.
usual,
Yeah.
as usual, on point and far-reaching. And I think Judy must be quite amused to hear how seriously we are looking at her relationship with her father. But I have some questions for Judy about her mother, which we'll come back to. First, I would like to ask if Dr. Choitali Moitro is here yet, or Gurudash, could you tell me if you can see her?
No, ma'am. She's
okay. Excellent. Let's just go on ahead. We have 4 scholars and guests. Our membership representations are over for now. So Judy, if you're just patient for a few more minutes, that would be just super. Dr. Smita Kothari, who is in Arizona at the moment, but is from the University of Toronto. Smita, would you have anything to contribute? We'd love to hear your views.
Thank you, Julie. Julie, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Great to have you, Judy, Fong, as our guest, and I look forward to hearing. I have to say, I just want to address a couple of points. The no good man in her book is the first husband. I think it was Sangeeta who referred it to her father. It's an appendage that's always, the man never remains named in the book. He's always just referred to as the no good man. And that is her first husband, her mother's first husband. The longing that you see throughout the book of a daughter longing to have that closeness with her mother. There's a scene in the book where she's at a restaurant overlooking this mother-daughter having a very joyous, free relationship. And Judy is just longing. She wished she had that with her mother. And what I kept thinking in that moment is she's had such a rich, all these conversations she had with her mother, of knowing their stories. I don't know, maybe there was a thing about her idea of a close relationship, because those stories wouldn't have come from her mother had she not been close to, after all, her mother only had her since she never really ventured out of the house. So some of the stories, I mean, it's a marriage of convenience for her mother, which she uncovers only after the second, well, she sort of had the inkling in the first trip, but the second trip confirms that her mother was between a rock and a hard place. Either she did go back to the no good man, because that's all she had, her survival.
Smita, if I can just say that was an excellent point. And I think one we'll keep in view to ask Judy about our relationship with her mother, I think intrigues all of us here at this discussion. Smita, because of the constraints of time, I hope you will not be annoyed with me if we just do a quick move on and then come. Thank you so much for waking up so early in Arizona. Really appreciate it. Raka, if you're there, first Raka Mukherjee and then Dr. Aparna Sanyal. Go ahead.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, yes, Raka. Raka is a master's first class student out of university here in Calcutta, and she's going to be pursuing a PhD, I think, which includes your book, Midnight at the Dragon Cafe, Judy. Go ahead, Raka.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this opportunity. And I'm overwhelmed right now because it was a dream for me to be on a call with Judy, ma'am, somewhere. And I have waited for this moment for 2 years since I read Midnight at the Dragon Cafe. So it's a privilege for me to be able to speak today about the year of finding memory. I'm going to take 2 minutes to speak about a specific place which really made me feel like I could find a lot of intertextuality with it. That is the Gold Mountain, and how the Gold Mountain has been explored in the memoir, and how the sense of belonging and the return to the imaginary homeland has been explored. So while I was reading the memoir, the mention of the Gold Mountain and that the idea that the Gold Mountain might be her father's chance at getting back his identity, and the idea that, you know, when she went back to China, she knew that her Canadian migration certificate had told that her birth, you know, I was born in the Gold Mountain, but now I have a hairline fracture in my certainty. the line really made me think that, when Su Jen in Midnight at the Dragon Cafe is talking about her belonging and talking about having blue eyes and having golden hair and having the desire to meet with Chinese people who spoke English. And in the year of finding memory, the same gold mountain was probably the mythical El Dorado for me. The mythical El Dorado is a place, it's a place of gold, it's a place of jewels, and it's mentioned in a lot of fantasy fiction. And here I think the fictional land was the homeland that, was all on the certificate. Because after all, the only memory is the place where we suture back to the original roots and the identity of the author here. And also there were some parts where I found parallels with the short stories of Alice Munro, and also to mention the liminal space of Kim, where the memories that we are, since this is a memoir, the memories that we think of are how we perceive a particular people. And here the author has mentioned that these memories, I know of my parents and how I heard about them from the relatives in China when I went back there, was like mythologies that were constructed around my parents' lives. And it was completely different. And it was like I was an outsider here. So it's probably not a presentation at this moment, just a question for me that, how does it really feel? Because I have read about the fictional Su Jen feeling not quite at home. I have read about Kim. I have read about the sisters in Alice Munro short stories. But how does it really feel to not relate and not have that epiphanic moment that you might have expected when you reached the village, and to feel that the setting is quite medieval. It's not what I have grown up with and what I have identified with. And how does authority function in that liminal space? Because a hairline crack in the identity might also be an agency to remember and rediscover one's own belonging, because then we do not belong to a physical space. We become multicultural, and we become the owners of the liminal space in our memories, which nobody can take away. So that's my little take on this memoir, and I'm really grateful right now. I'm having like I'm having lots of words right now, because this is a very emotional moment for me to be here. So thank you,
Raka. Thank you. Maybe we let Judy mull over that for a second. Aparna, come right in. Also, True Blue Canadian. Come right in, and please limit your comments to about 2 minutes, because we'd love to hear Judy as well. Go ahead.
Great. It's also a great pleasure for me, privilege to be online in a discussion with Judy Bates. I really loved reading her book. What I focused on actually when I was preparing just a short piece for this meeting was the prologue, because I found the prologue was really extraordinary. It was very rich and suggestive, and I did originally think that it was that it had an investigative element to it, almost like a detective story, because the first sentence of the prologue tells us what the center of the story is, that the writer's father hanged himself, and that his daughter, the writer, continues to struggle with anger and emotional instability, asking herself, was I angry at my father and what he had done to himself? To us. She never overtly discusses how his suicide might have been related to his Confucius beliefs, that arguably there are altruistic suicides accepted by Confucian thought. But we are told later on, about page 103, much later that her father had been a Confucian scholar and that he had a selfless nature, one that quietly endured that what he calls a dog life, who regularly sends money to his children and someone has already mentioned, contributes regularly to his village, who counsels frugality to his daughter for the sake of giving to family and friends. The writer does not mention a suicide note, but treats the box of documents as though they might be a suicide note, most especially the worthless piece of paper documenting his payment of the head tax demanded of Chinese immigrants prior to the Second World War. This and other worthless documents in the box seemed to kill her father over and over again in her mind, making his whole life meaningless. Yet, the writer notes in her self-analysis, the worthless head tax certificate of $500 was the cost of her happiness. So there is this conflict immediately. And people have mentioned many times that there is a conflict, a long conversation between the mother and daughter in this book. But I think that actually there is a conversation between the writer and her father. And it seems like a silent conversation, but I think you see it right from the beginning that in his Confucian tradition, his Canadian daughter is having a conversation and perhaps a kind of conflict with his history and his belief system. The writer goes on to describe her father's suicide as a sudden explosion of glass, hurling shards so small and fine they embedded themselves deep in our flesh, never to be removed. In her slow gathering and planting of her father's family and personal history, as well as the roots of his second marriage, the writer's way of resuscitating, is this the writer's way of resuscitating her father, and in a happy, meaningful form. The documents were cared for decades, not out of pride or love, but out of fear, the writer notes, because without them, her father's existence could have been, as she puts it, suddenly nullified. Does the writer think that her father's belief system and her own role as his dutiful Confucian daughter have been...
I'm sorry, we have to wrap it up here, love. That was perfect. I think you've opened up a lot of windows there. Okay. And I think we should turn to Judy now. But thanks again. You opened up, a whole heap of questions there. Okay. So Judy, welcome again. And it's absolutely marvelous that Canadian Hydro has done us proud again and that you're back in action despite the minus 25 degrees. Here's my first question to you. I remember many conversations we have had before and conversations that you've had in my classroom in University of Toronto, as well as here at Jadavpur University, where you visited. So I think we are all wanting to know from you that despite this idea of the loss of face, which is so important in the Chinese cultural context, you say that it took you a heck of a lot of time. You were nearly 50 by the time that you broke through and said that, yes, I have a story to tell and the majority Anglo-Canadian will be interested in my story. So what is really celebratory about you as a writer, Judy, and I've followed you now for nearly 13 years, is to ask you, despite the challenges, the fiscal challenges, the challenges of being a minority and so neglected in Acton when you were growing up so many years ago, you still say and maintain and you show that you had a happy childhood. Can you tell us a little bit about having that happy childhood and how you did it?
Wow. First of all, thank you for inviting me, Julie. And I'm really quite overwhelmed by many of the comments that were made. And it brings to mind many years ago when I listened to Walter Mosley, the American writer, speak. And he said that as a writer, you have to keep in mind that there are people out there who will read your work, who are a whole lot smarter than you, and who will probably get more out of your work than you ever intended to put in it. And I have to admit that I am very humbly reminded of that as I listen to all your feedback. As far as my childhood is concerned, I think that in many ways I was not unlike a lot of children in that I just accepted whatever it was that was my childhood as my normal. I mean, I don't think that children really compare until they're much older, that you just accept the fact that you're growing up in a laundry and that your father washes other people's clothes and your parents don't speak English, that was my normal. I quickly realized that it wasn't everyone else's normal, but that it was mine. And I think that there was an ability on my part to compartmentalize, which I think was probably a survival skill, that I really recognized that I had a life within the laundry that was with my family, and then a life outside the laundry. Also, I was in my own way, I think, a fairly cooperative, compliant child. So teachers liked me, and I think that helped. You know, I was not secure enough to be a rebellious child. So I think that those sorts of things contributed to what I call a happy childhood. It was obviously, as I look back, a childhood with struggle, but I think that because I was so determined to be happy and fit in, that I made it a happy childhood. That I was, you know, it was just sheer determination.
Judy, we are all very intrigued.
I can't hear you, Julie.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Julie, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay, so here's the
yes,
question.
I can.
We are all very intrigued by.
Yes, I can.
We are all very
I've
intrigued by.
Yes.
Can everyone hear me now?
Yes, ma'am, you are loud.
Yes, we can.
Loud and clear.
Thank you, Roma. So, Judy, the question is, we're all very intrigued by your contingent of nearly 13 of you.
Now.
13 of you going to China, where you met your half sister. What was that experience like, that you met her after a zillion years? Maybe you were 3 years old when you met her the last time. So how did that feel, making a connection with your father's family?
Mm-hmm. It was quite overwhelming. I hope I've written about it in a way that conveys that sense of being overwhelmed in the book. at the same time, even though I was overwhelmed with emotion, it was also a reinforcement of my outsider status, because I really felt in some ways I was watching someone else's story, because the main emotion was really between my sister and then my two brothers, because they had had a shared childhood and shared struggles, particularly during the war, when they were basically orphaned because their mother had died and their father was stranded over. So I really had the sense of almost watching a movie, that I was the one who was outside of it. And yet I was connected. So again, it was a reinforcement, as someone had said, of that liminal space.
So Judy, moving on to another
I've
question.
lost you again, Julie.
Can you hear me now? Can you all hear me now?
Yes, Judy, you're loud and
Yeah,
clear.
we can hear you. We can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sangeeta.
Yes.
Judy, so the question, I think the next question, which would lead from here,
Yes.
is that you're a very successful writer in Canada. You know, your readership really was palpable, and the fact that you were a favorite writer in the city, and I still remember it's the one book that Toronto read for that year, and it was Midnight at the Dragon Cafe, and we celebrated you. When you look back, you started your writing career almost when you were 50, and what do you think were the biggest challenges ever since you read James Baldwin and you realized, my goodness, it doesn't matter if he's Black, people are still reading him. And you broke through the barrier and you pushed and you said, no, the Anglo-Canadian majority will be interested in my stories. So how do you reckon you became a successful writer? I know that's a stupid question or even a difficult question, but would greatly admire an attempt for you to try and answer that. You know, being a minority writer and then being so successful.
Oh, Julie, I am very, very flattered. And certainly I think in comparison to other writers, much less minority writers, I don't really enjoy the same degree of success that really successful writers out there enjoy. I would say that my 3 books had modest success, and I have a small profile within the Canadian literary community, but I'm very flattered by all that you have said. I think that as far as writing is concerned, it's one of those situations where I guess it was time, and I'm not really, and certainly I have spoken about the influence of James Baldwin, and that it was an influence that I only recognized upon looking back, and that it really lay dormant for many, many years. But I think that it just gets to a point where those stories have to be told, and it really wasn't even necessarily my saying that I think that the Canadian public will be interested in my stories. I think it was just saying that these are stories that are mine, and it's time. It's really as basic as that it's time. And also, I sometimes wonder if the undertaking of writing was done out of sheer ignorance of what was really involved. Because I think that if I had known ahead of time how bloody hard it would be, I'm not sure that I would have done it. So, there you are. Not a particularly profound answer, but probably one that That's probably what I can muster at the moment. My brain is a little foggy too.
Judy, would you say that the lot of the younger writers in Canada who are representing different communities, and I'm thinking of Kerry Sakamoto, Hiromi Goto, Sham Selvadurai, and the next generation of writers, are they being more accepted more easily now? And is multicultural working in that way?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think so. Very, very much so. Very much so. Yes, I would agree. I think that they're a lot more easily accepted, but at the same time, I do feel that getting published and being a member of a minority sometimes might make it easier to get noticed, but at the same time, there is still that attitude of, well, we already have one Chinese writer on our roster. We don't need another one. So there is still some of that out there. And of course, you have to keep in mind that I published The Year of Finding Memory 11 years ago. So I'm really not all that current in the publishing scene. So I think you have to keep that in mind, that if you want a really current opinion, you probably should be speaking to people who have published more recently, people like Madeleine Tien or, again, my brain is fogging up, but people who have published recently, S.C. Edugin, who had a book out quite recently, Andre Alexis, people like that. But then those are names that are very well established too. So it's really perhaps a little unfair to compare very, very established names to ones who are trying to break into the publishing world.
Judy, there is a question that is niggling at a lot of your readers. And I think
Julie,
I'm
not getting any. Yes, okay.
Okay, so if you could possibly talk to us about the relationship that you had with your mother, and because it comes through the Year of Living of Finding Memory, and it's a living palpable issue. Do you just want to talk to us a little bit about your relationship with your mother and your father, and and the fact that they had a bittersweet marriage, but what was your relationship like with your mom?
My relationship with my mother, I think it was a very complex relationship. I think that I can't remember the speaker's name who spoke about the fact that I wrote in that scene where I was full of envy watching that a mother-daughter scene where they seemed very close and where they were chatting and laughing and whatever, and that I hadn't had that kind of relationship with my mother. And I think in my particular case, there was always a clash of East and West, because I've got the sun shining right in my eyes, sorry. But anyway, I think that with my mother, there was very much a clash of cultures. And I think that because we didn't share a language, And we didn't share, in many ways, a culture. What we had was a very intensified mother-daughter relationship. And I think that the person who spoke about that really hit it on the nail, in that when she said that she did feel that in spite of everything, that my mother and I had a very close relationship. And it was close, but it was all based on blood. And I think that when your relationship is so intensified and so pointed, it was almost as if the relationship just existed as this very deep, solid kernel, and it really didn't grow beyond that. And I think that that's what I longed for. I longed for that kind of relationship with a mother that would expand into the realm of friendship as well, because I saw that my friends had that. I longed for the kind of relationship with a mother where I would go to a film, where we would share a book, where we would go to an art gallery, or those sorts of things. But those things just weren't available to us. And so it was both a relationship that was deeply loving and very, very intense. And yet it was one on my part that was full of longing at the same time. Does that help? Does that answer anything? And I'm not sure that I can provide all the answers, because I think that
helps.
Feelings change, don't they? And I think even the, I think that for me, the writing of the book was also reconciling the fact that there are some things that will remain unknowable. And that's just life. And I think that parents are on some level unknowable.
I think that's a good point.
Judy, shifting gears a little bit. I'm sure your readers here would love to know your process of writing. I mean, you live on this gorgeous farm. Michael and you are such generous hosts to all of us who visit. You have a lovely garden. You work very hard. How do you find time? Are you a writer who gets up early in the morning? You're not an early person. So how does your writing process happen?
I think I should clarify right now that I do view myself as a writer, and that I have a couple of projects on the back burner. And with any luck, I think I have a couple of more books in me. On the other hand, I also know that I am not one of those writers who is a fount of stories that they just keep gurgling up and gurgling up. I may also have to reconcile myself to the fact that I will leave a small legacy. And if that is the case, my legacy may be my 3 books. But I can tell you a little about my writing process and how it has happened in the past. And of course, in my situation, I have actually been doing very little writing, and that's because I now have 3 grandchildren. I garden with great dedication, and Michael and I travel a lot now, which was something that which we weren't able to do before. I'm going to have to switch this. The sun is right in my eyes. I'm one of those lucky people. I've been able to embrace life. But the writing process, I found that I was never the kind of writer who was very well organized. And I have always felt that writers fit into more or less 2 categories, which can overlap. You either write like an architect in that you have a plan, you have a blueprint that you follow, or you write like an archaeologist. And in that you which is really inefficient. And that's how I write. You start with a kernel of an idea and you dig around and you dig around, and then, you know, eventually you find a vase, and then eventually you find a room, and then eventually you might find a building, a village, whatever. And you end up cobbling these things together. But my way of writing is extremely inefficient because I don't really know where I'm going until I've really done an awful lot of digging. But I do find that when I get into the writing process, and when I'm probably about halfway through, I become very obsessive, and there is very, very little else that I think about. And I've often thought that when I was toward the end of all 3 books, that if I had lived alone, I would probably have never washed. You know, like it would have just taken over, and I would have probably eaten out of a can. But before I'm writing, I have to confess I'm a very good housekeeper because I'm so easily distracted. So I find that talking to other writers, you know, everyone's process is pretty unique. There are some writers who are incredibly disciplined. They get up at a certain time and they write from 8 until you know 11 or till 12. They have a 40-minute break and they pick up again, and you know they're totally admirable. And I often wish that I were like that, because if I were, I would have probably written 10 books by now, but I'm not. So, you know, and I've just decided that I will live my life in the best way that I can. And if my legacy happens to be 3 books, then it's 3 books.
How wonderful is that?
So,
Judy, since this is a Bengal Club event, and we've had the privilege of having you not only visit, but stay at the Bengal Club and visit Jadavpur University. We showed a lot of slides before you came on. Maybe it would be lovely if you could say a few words about your experiences of Calcutta and when we can expect you back after the pandemic. Would love to have you.
oh, I would love to come back. Michael and I loved Calcutta. It was probably one of our favorite cities. And I was actually so surprised at how much I loved Calcutta, because I think that Calcutta has suffered from a bit of a bad rap, you know, but first of all, I think physically it's beautiful. And the other thing that intrigued me about Calcutta was the writing of Amitav Ghosh. And so, of course, when I got to Calcutta, remember, Julie, I asked you and Harish to take me to the Ghats because I wanted to see them, because they had been written about in, what was that? What was it? Flood of Fire? Or was it? No, it was in The Sea of Poppies. There he wrote about the Ghats and the people living along the Ghats. And I remember wanting to see that. And then, of course, all the architecture that was in Calcutta was just so fascinating. And I remember that you arranged for us to go on those guided walks. And we had the most charming guides. There was this one young man who took us and showed us all the different architecture, all the different buildings, the architect, the writers building, and where the one where they wrote to the widows back in England. And you know and I think what surprised me about that building was just the sheer size of it. So of course what comes through is that Calcutta is also a city of letters, and of course the pride of Calcutta is Tagore. And again, after reading, I remember that I had just read the Lowlands, and by oh, help me out, Julie, Jhumpa
Shako, I think you came
and
to
some of the scenes there took place in the universities in Calcutta.
Jadavpur University, yeah.
Jhumpa Lahiri. I think she meant Jhumpa Lahiri.
But anyway, yes, and he took us to one of the universities where scenes took place, and there was a massive poster of Tagore there, and I remember that I was very proud because when he asked who that was, I knew right away, and I was the only one besides my cousins who had read the Lowlands. So yes, it was. I loved Calcutta, and the next time I come, I want to visit the Sundarbans. So yes, I will return.
Yes, we hope to welcome you back here. We hope we will be here then. And it's been marvelous chatting with you, Judy. Thanks for your time. And I hope that we will all applaud Hydro Canada for the wonderful job they've done to have you on board with us. This is marvelous. Thank you so very much, Judy. It's such an honor to have you with us.
I too will salute Hydro Canada, and Julie, thank you. And Julie, thank you, and please come and visit us in Canada.
Yes, I think we'll wait for the storm to abate, and then Harish and I look greatly forward.
And thank you for having me.
You are so welcome from all of us on behalf of the Bengal Club. Really, really appreciate this time and the effort you've made so early in the morning. Thank you, Judy. Thank you. Have a lovely day. So all of you who are here, really appreciate it. Hope you all enjoyed that.
You too, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, Judy. Thank you. Hi,
Bye.
Roma.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
So much.
Hope everybody enjoyed that.
It was fabulous.
Yes, we did.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you,
Good night.
Julie.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Appreciate your being here. Thank you, Smita, Roma, Aparna, Raka, everybody. Thank you, Gurudash.
What an authentic voice she has.
Yes.
Very authentic voice.
Yes. Paramita, thank you again.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you.